Hi, this is Anna Crowe with the Get Real podcast, where CEOs, CMOs, and communications experts share their real advice. It's 5 questions under 9 minutes because we get to it real fast. So let's get to it. I'm so excited to have Anita join us this morning. Anita, in a few sentences, could you please tell us who you are and what you do?
So my name is Anita Brikman, and I am the lead of communications. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs for the Consumer Healthcare Products Association. That's CHPA. So what is that? Basically, we're an association that in Washington, D.C., that represents the vast majority of makers of over-the-counter medicines, dietary supplements, all the stuff that you see in the drugstore. So that is who CHPA represents. I also have a second job, which many of us do these days. I'm the executive director of our educational foundation, and that is consumer focused, and it is all about medicine safety. How do we help consumers use, store, and dispose of over-the-counter medicine safely so that they don't use them too much, so that little kids are safe, so that when things are expired, they get out of the house, couldn't be, misused or end up in the wrong place. So I have 2 roles: leading communications for the businesses we represent, but also the foundation, which is that nonprofit arm hoping to help people lead happy, healthy lives through self-care that's responsible.
Wow. Well, Anita, you are not only a busy woman, but your roles are so important. You're doing such incredible work. And obviously, communications is a big part of your job, but this podcast is all around connections and leadership advice. And my first question to you is around creating authentic connections, because I hear from other leaders that creating those connections can be challenging, whether it's your customers or your teams, members, employees, et cetera, when there's a lot of noise out there. What's your take on that?
There is so much noise these days. And to your point, we really don't have customers. Our members have customers, but how do we connect with our members? So I think one of the biggest things is a personal understanding of what are their needs. What is the solution that you're trying to offer? That mass marketing approach to everyone offering the same thing, I think we are so far beyond that. There is so much more personalized marketing, peer-to-peer influencer. And in the association world, it's who are our members? We've got large members who are multinational, and we've got smaller mom and pop kind of operations. So what is it that they need from us? Offering personalized solutions to whoever you're communicating with, I think, is key. Multimedia is something I am so passionate about. The general newsletter or the email blast that used to be enough, I don't think it's enough anymore. There's so much at our fingertips with multimedia. At CHPA, we are right in the heart of Washington, D.C. I put together a little mini TV studio so that we could do a lot more video broadcasts. We are launching a podcast as well, which I think is appropriate here with what we're talking about. And there are also so many ways to hear back from your customers or your members. There's new technology out there where you can really have your members or whoever you're talking to send some video back in a really nice professional way. Of course, it's organic, it's on iPhones and whatever, or through Zoom, but technologies out there allow people to center themselves, really put together crisp answers, which then help you get that information back from your customer, from your member, and then showcase value of membership. So we're utilizing tools like that to get video testimonials back. I also think when we try to communicate in an authentic way, it helps to reach out and make things less formal. I just have one example. So we have a fantastic group of women who are on our CHPA board of directors. My marketing director came up with the idea for Women's History Month. Let's reach out and ask them, what would you tell your younger self about your professional career, your trajectory, and leadership? And we got the most amazing answers back. And not just did we compile their answers, but there were fun outtakes where they were laughing oh my gosh, wow, if I only knew what I knew then, or run, or just jokes like that. Compiling that as well, we opened up with the personalities of who these women are, even though they are CEOs, they are leads of North America for these major companies, and then went into their answers about what they would tell their younger selves. So I think that personal connection, I know this was super popular, not just among our board, which we want it to be because that's very much who we serve. But then when we posted it on LinkedIn, so many other women started commenting about their own personal journeys. So to me, breaking through the noise is looking for novel ways to connect on a personal level. And here, especially during the pandemic, I think we're all looking for that connection, which has been woefully lacking with other people.
Absolutely. You said some amazing things there and some really great points around personalization, personal connections, education, even in feedback loop and actively listening, right? So those are all really great pieces of advice. And is there any other advice that you have to share with other leaders? Is there anything else that you think is really important?
You know, and I'm taking this actually from one of our female board leaders, so I just can't take all the credit for it. But she was very passionate about embracing change. And we've had to accelerate that, obviously, in the pandemic. But successful businesses are looking ahead and they are evolving and they are not complacent or okay with the status quo. So I think embracing change as a leader, as hard as that may be, as painful at times, and also at times it means you may fail. Embracing change, I think, is really something that the new leadership needs to have. And also looking at what's out there in the landscape. Who are the new people that you are trying to bring on your team? What are the needs of your customers or your members? They're constantly changing, especially here during the pandemic. I lead a fantastic but highly demanding group of people, highly demanded upon. Let me say that instead. They are not demanding. There's high demands on them, especially in media. We really had to change a lot when we were all working virtually, especially trying to get media statements together, collaborate, finding new ways to do it and do it efficiently. I think that is something a leader needs to embrace. And of course, people have had to do that so much in so many different ways during COVID-19. But I think regardless of the situation, embracing change is important. I also think empathetic leadership is the way to go. You hear this term CEO and then sometimes chief empathy officer as opposed to chief executive officer. And knowing who your people are, taking a moment and saying, how are you? What's going on in your life? That builds such a connection and I think loyalty. And even if you're able to show some of your own vulnerabilities, it lets people trust you. Now, that's not to say that if you are emotional and connected, that you have to lower your expectations. To the contrary, I think if you've built a really strong professional relationship with the people on your team, when there is a problem, when there's a performance issue or a critical topic to discuss, it's easier to do that. Even if it's hard news to deliver, if you've been accessible all along, I think it's easier to tell your folks, okay, well, you know what, this is going great, but here, not so much. What can we do to improve that? If you've been an empathetic, connected, actively listening leader all along, it's easier to tackle the tough stuff. And I don't think, sometimes I think people think, all right, if I'm too nice or friendly, then when the tough stuff comes, it's going to be too hard to deliver. I don't believe that. I believe you can be open and honest and accessible, and at the same time, still be a strong leader that demands high performance. And I think those are the two main things, is that empathetic leadership, the ability to embrace change. I think we've all had to really up our game in those areas during this pandemic.
Absolutely. And those are some really great points. I love the conversation around empathetic leadership and just in general, creating that trust. Because if we're unable to let our guard down or connect with someone on that human level and really hear them, how are we going to create that trust and that camaraderie? So to your point, the feedback loop is so much more powerful when you understand the person's position and where they might be coming from versus
Exactly.
that inconsistent behavior that can be associated with inauthentic traits. So I think that's such a great point. And to your other point about change management, I'm really curious, and maybe this is something you can comment on too, is we were all forced to make changes quickly, right? No matter this, whether you're CEO or entry-level employee, everyone was forced to make change fast. And then things continued to evolve. And obviously business leaders had other things to deal with regards to their teams and organizations and other things. But as we're on this side, potentially, or in this phase of the pandemic and everything, I'm also curious on your thoughts about forthcoming change and how people are going to be or should be embracing change in the future, because now it seems we may have more control or we may not, but we certainly have more options today. So I don't know if you have any thoughts to share on that.
I think what we've been able to show is that many people, so many of us, now again, not everyone has the option to work at home. And I am so sympathetic and so appreciative to the people who continue to do their jobs on the front lines, service workers, or even out in the field where they just really don't have the option like this to be at a computer and still get work done. However, many people are doing this. And I think what we as leaders are going to face in the future is an expectation from employees of greater flexibility. I think there's no question about that. I know that in our office, we are a downtown Washington, D.C. office, very buttoned up, high performing, great team, but high expectations of being in the office 5 days a week. I don't know that that is ever going to quite come back. And as we try to attract and keep really good talent, I think we're going to have to be more flexible as far as geography, as far as time in the office, and not look at hours on a timesheet, but possibly how is a project getting done, how well, what is the performance. I know on my team, I have several people with young children, and that meant the normal 9 to 5 day was not going to be a thing, that they needed to take time out. And sometimes there wasn't childcare, or a nanny is sick, or then even getting offline for bedtime and then getting back online again to get things done. I think what has intrinsically changed is the way we conceive of work. I also think that it's going to impact workspaces and major metropolitan areas. We've already seen an exodus of people who no longer feel like they have to be in the hubs to be doing their work. So I feel like we have major change ahead as a nation to this new normal. I also think that while it's wonderful that we have these vaccines rolling out, thank goodness it is finally happening. I don't see COVID. Our industry is in the healthcare space, and many of our companies, even though we're on the over-the-counter side, they've been working diligently on these vaccines, and so grateful for those scientists who've been going 24/7 to deliver these life-saving vaccines. But what we're hearing is that this is not going to just go away. Like we get a vaccine and it's all back to normal. There are going to be variants. There's going to be increased need for vigilance moving forward for years to come, because I think COVID is with us to stay. It is going to become much more manageable, like the flu, but we're going to have to continue to look at vaccination. The other area that we've seen the biggest change is this embracing of self-care. Now, our companies make over-the-counter products, but in general, I think where we've seen a big change is people saying, all right, as opposed to always going to the doctor or always going into an office somewhere, what can I do to take care of myself? And is telemedicine an option for me? And also, what can I do to keep my family happier, healthier within this new environment? I think there's a greater focus on self-care, wellness, and I also hope we see a greater focus on mental health, because it has been stressed to the capacity during this time. What can we do to encourage resilience moving forward? And those are very personal things and not necessarily business things, but they do, of course, translate into the workplace, because it's people who do the work. And the people need to feel like they are seen and heard, as we just talked about. So the flexibility of work, the emphasis on wellness and self-care, I think that is here to stay.
Absolutely. And of course, it brings us back to the points you made earlier in regards to personalization, active listening, empathy, and all those things being important as we buckle up for the next level of change, because it is going to
Absolutely.
change and evolve. Very cool. Well, before we get to our final question, you work with a lot of incredible leaders day in and day out, but are there any other successful executives such as yourself that you would like to acknowledge while we have you on this podcast, or perhaps shout out?
I would really like to acknowledge a woman named Jessica Doyle. So I have to get a little bit of a disclaimer or a little bit of a past history. I was a former broadcast journalist in television news. I worked for many years in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., always really focused on healthcare. So it translates quite well into my work with what I'm doing now with medicines. But one of my coworkers at a television station in Washington, D.C. was Jessica Doyle. She'd been at CNN. She worked with me at the CBS affiliate in Washington, D.C. And she too made a transition out of broadcast journalism. And I think sometimes for those of us who are in the TV world for a long time, you think, well, I'm not sure I can do anything else. And it's quite to the contrary. And I think Jessica is such a great example of that. She is now, let me get her title right. She is the VP of Global Communications and Engagement Marketing at Etsy. And I just recently met up with her, well, not that recently, before the pandemic in New York City, and talked about life post-broadcasting and the phenomenal challenge, but the excitement of starting something brand new. And she has done that with Etsy and brought her talents from what she did before as a communicator to this business role, but also looking for novel marketing aspects that could get Etsy even more attention, more media coverage, and also to other constituents, as far as customers, et cetera. This idea of really utilizing past skills like that to start communicating to brand new audiences. I really applaud Jessica, and she was an inspiration for me when I decided to make the jump out of the broadcast news world into healthcare communications, and then eventually into executive leadership.
Wow, she sounds incredible. And of course, as a communications professional, that just makes my heart very happy. So, so great to hear. All right, well, our last question is more of a fun one. You gave us a little glimpse into some of your background,
right?
But can you tell us about your first job? How did you get started?
So this is kind of a funny one. So there's my first job, and then there's my first professional job.
Let's do
my
jobs.
First job ever was working at a strawberry farm in southern Indiana, where I grew up. We helped pick the strawberries, but I was also put in charge of some of the delivery all through Indiana in this big truck full of strawberries. Given the fact that I'm not a great driver, you just have to see the humor in this of this 16-year-old kid behind the wheel, 17-year-old behind the wheels of this truck carrying strawberries through the winding, back roads of Brown County, Indiana. So that was my first job, and it taught me a lot about hard work and also empathy for people who really are doing manual labor day in and day out, and the toll that can take. And I've always just been so appreciative of all the workers out there, and that gave me a firsthand look. My first job in television, there are big markets and there are small markets. And when you come out of school, unless you just get a really big break, you're going to start in a really small market. My first television job was in Zanesville, Ohio, at a tiny television station there, where I was doing overnight radio and then reports on the weekends, which included some reports from the county fairs all around Muskingum County, Ohio. And I still remember that, and how much I learned from that, and how hungry I was to move on. And so I went through a series of television jobs in Terre Haute, Indiana, in Dayton, Ohio, got my break and went to Philadelphia, and then here eventually to Washington, D.C. But my first job was in Zanesville, Ohio, as an overnight radio anchor and a weekend news TV reporter.
Wow. So working overnight and on the weekends, I'm surprised that you wanted to get out of there and find
Right? I know, it just seems so glamorous, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, very cool. Well, Anita, how can people get a hold of you and learn more about the organization and all the things that you're doing?
You know, I think the best way is actually to take a look at our consumer-facing website, knowyouroTCs.org. If you're interested in what we're doing as far as medicine safety, knowyouroTCs.org. I'm also on Twitter at Anita Brikman, as well as on Instagram at Anita Brikman. So would welcome comments, questions, engagement, and of course, LinkedIn. How could I forget LinkedIn? So you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and then our consumer-facing website for the foundation's work in keeping people safe when they use medicines is knowyouroTCs.org.
Fantastic. Well, appreciate you joining us today. And thanks everyone for tuning in. This is Anna Crowe. For more insights, visit us at crowepr.com. Thanks so much.